guys, super stoked to see that you are joining me to learn how to paint this really exciting little bunny here. He's pretty cute, if you ask me. I like to call him my little Artalishious bunny, and he's quite fun. He's a bit of fun to paint, and let's dive in, shall we? So just like you do when you go for a sporting adventure, what you need to do when you do art is you need to warm up just the same way. So there's a few things we need to do even before we warm up. We've got to activate our paints and get some materials ready. So I've got some sticky tape, my black magic paper. I've got some water, my paintbrush, some paper towel, some paper to warm up on. It's just a little piece of paper. Plus I've also got my piece of paper that I want my bunny to go on available to me. And I've got my paints here. Now you can activate your paints in two ways. I like to use a spray bottle and I just spray them all down, but you could just as easily run them under the tap. If you run them under the tap, under the sink, they become nice and clean. They don't have these marks on them from when you might have mixed colors in the past. And you want to give them a really good spray, because when we use watercolor, we have to have a lot of water. Water is super important to get good results for watercolor paintings. So I've activated my paints now. They're all really wet, and if they get dry throughout me painting, I'll just spray them down again. So the very first thing I want you to do is I want you to get your paintbrush and swish it around in the water and scrape it around on the bottom. The reason you do that is because inside the bristles become filled with water, and you really want to have a lot of water when you do watercolor. I'm going to pick a color just to do my warm up in. I really like this bright blue here, so I'm going to pick that one for today. I'm getting my paint by swishing it around and twisting it and twisting it, and then scraping it a little bit off the side so that it's not going to drip from my paintbrush as I move it over to my paper. And for my warm up today, I'm going to paint some lines. I'm going to paint some thick lines by pressing really firm, and I'm going to paint some thin lines by only applying a little bit of pressure. Okay, and I can do those in both directions, in squiggles, in zigzags, in dots. I can also do this motion here, which is pretty important for the bunny. I'm going to go and do lots of little dots that are lots of big dots actually, really. And I'm going to do them pretty close together so that some of them touch, but so that not all of them touch. And this, if we do it in brown or any other color really, it ends up looking like fur. So watercolors are a pretty special medium because they do some magical things on paper that other paints don't do. Now, if at any point, by the way, you want to pause the video to practice what I've just said and rewind it, please do. That's absolutely encouraged. So watercolors are a special medium because they do this. So all I'm going to do here, and I encourage you to try the same because it's actually really exciting. So I get my paintbrush, I swish it around really good, get it filled up with water. I don't scrape any of it off. And then I'm just going to paint a little wet rectangle. And you won't be able to see that on the camera, but you'll be able to see what I'm about to do with it. I'm just collecting some paint and I'm going to put it into that wet space. I'm hoping you can see how much that is growing. I haven't moved that around at all. I've just dropped that in and it's moving around that whole wet area. I can add it up the other side here and it moves everywhere it's wet. It won't move outside of the area I've wet on my page. It'll stay inside that area. Now, that's a really good thing in watercolor because it means that we can paint an area that we want. Say I wanted to paint a eyeball, for example, and I can paint that area that I want, and it will only go in that area if I just tap the color in, and that will eventually dry. But it can also be a bit of a bad thing because if we have a look at the bunny, well, the bunny has black eyes and brown fur. If I was to try and paint his black eyes while the brown fur was still wet, the black paint would go all out and smudge everywhere. it's actually a special thing in watercolor. It's called bleeding. So the paint would bleed into the other areas if it's wet. So to avoid that happening, we need to work in layers. And the layers help us to get different textures in our painting, but they also help us to get one color underneath and another color over the top. And it also helps us to not get any bleeds in the areas we don't want two different colors to mix. So I have a heat tool that I will use to help me dry my areas off, but you can use a hairdryer, or you can just be patient and wait for the layer to dry before adding the next one on, and just pause the video and come back to it. So I'm going to show you what I mean, and I will just pause the video in between using the heat tool because it's a bit annoying to watch. So if I say I paint, actually this one's already dry up here. So this bit up here is already dry. I'm just going to use my heat gun for a moment just to make sure it's really dry. No, I'm not, because it's not plugged in. Never mind, it's already dry anyway. So if I want to paint over the top of that now in a different color, you'll notice that it doesn't blend in. But because this is wet down here, if I put a different color in there, the paint will actually just move around. See, the paint's moving around in that area. It's all mixing together, which sometimes is a good effect, but other times it's not what we want to happen. So we have to make sure we dry our layers off really good in between. Okay, so I hope you feel really warmed up. I do. If you don't, just pause the video and come back. I'm going to get ready to do my bunny now. So I've got my art paper. I'm going to do it on A4 this time, but I've done these on A3 before and they look really lovely. If you want to do a big background, you might like to use an A4 picture on an A3 piece of paper. Got my magic black paper, and I want it to be black shiny side facing down on my paper. Now it's really important that you don't rub on this with your hand or press really hard on it before you are ready to start drawing, or anywhere you don't want your outline to be, because it will leave black marks that are a bit tricky to get up. So if I pop my black paper down and then I get my bunny outline from over here and place that over the top wherever I want to put him on my page. So my bunny outline, then my black paper with the black shiny side facing down on my art paper. My art paper should be the rough side up, facing up. Okay, stick it all down. Get my sticky tape. I don't need to stick it down too much. I just need to stick it down enough so that it's not going to move around while I am trying to trace my outline. And I can get a pencil and then I can start doing my outline. Now, just so that you can see what I'm doing, I'm actually going to use a yellow texter so that you can see that I'm just putting the lines where they appear on the bunny. So I hope you can see that yellow texture on the bunny. I don't need to be super careful. I can just do those lines because all bunnies look a little bit different. And if you decide when you're doing this outline that, oh, hang on, I don't want that tuft of hair there because I actually want to draw some flowers there, don't trace those on there, okay? Just leave those off and then you can do it however you like. So just tracing all of those bits on that I want to include in my painting, trying not to rub too hard with my hand and also trying not to press too hard with my texter, because if I press really hard, the outline will be really dark. And if you want a really dark outline, that's okay, you can press really hard. But if you don't want a really dark outline, I'm actually not going to draw the whiskers on because I think I'm going to add those on afterwards. Okay, if you don't want a really dark outline that you can see through your paint, then you need to make sure you press really lightly. So I've traced all of those bits now. Oops, I forgot those little bottom eyelashes there. trace all of those bits now. I'm going to peel off my sticky tape. Trying not to wreck my paper. If I want to do another one, I can keep doing these over and over again. It doesn't really matter that that black paper ripped a little bit there. I can use this so many times. This doesn't need to go in the bin. I can use this over and over and over and over and over again. And ta-da, there's my bunny. I didn't even have to draw a thing. And I'm going to use my eraser that I have just to try and rub off some of those black bits where I've smudged it so that they don't take away from my beautiful painting that I'm about to do. So you might like to do the same with yours. Just rubbing it out to make it as light as possible. I'm hoping that you can still see it. Yeah, looks good. Let's take off all of those outlines there. As much as I can. And don't worry too much if you have little marks here and there. You won't really notice them when you do your painting. So the very first thing I'm going to start with when I paint my bunny is I'm actually going to start with painting some of the fur, the first layer. Remember, you've got this printout too that you can access to remind you which bits are going first. So the very first thing I'm going to do is start painting some of the fur on the belly, on the cheeks, and in the ears, and just a little bit around the eyes. So the color I'm choosing to use doesn't have to be the color you choose to use. You can use whatever color you like. I've had lots of kids do pink bunnies or purple bunnies or blue bunnies, or they've done brown bunnies or gray bunnies. You can do whatever you like. The world is your oyster. If you notice your water's getting pretty dirty too, it's a good idea to swap it out for something that's clean. I'm just going to do that now. You can obviously just change your water at the sink. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to get some of this color here. Okay, get my paintbrush nice and wet with that color, scrape a little bit off. What I'm going to do with my paper towel, I'm actually going to tap my paintbrush on there just to get some of that excess water off, some of that excess paint. And I'm going to paint that color inside the ear. Okay. I'm going to use my paintbrush a little bit like a mop. So I'm going to get it on the side and scrape it down to the bottom and lift up because I want there to be some more color. Tap, 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 tap. Tap, tap, tap. Some more color down the bottom here, then up the top. And repeat that over this side. Painting that whole area. Paint, paint, paint. And scraping it down, scraping it down, scraping it down. Tap, 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 tap. Tap, tap, tap. Okay, now that's those ears inside there done. Tap, 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 tap. Clean off my brush. And I'm going to get this color here. I'm going to paint that over here. Now I'm putting that on and I'm going, oh, that's a bit dark. So I'm actually going to clean my brush off and just move some of that paint around by diluting it with the water. So clean my brush off and just using a clean brush, diluting that. And I'm just going to pick some of that by twisting my paintbrush in it and moving it over that other side there as well. You can see that it's a lot lighter on that other side because of the way that I've done that. So getting that paint there and moving it over here. That paint, moving it over here. And I'm going to use that same paint because I don't really want it very dark. And I'm going to go in the belly part of this bunny, inside the belly part there. All right, and that's his little mouth is done there too, isn't it? Okay. All right, so that's my very first step done. Oh, almost. Sorry, I almost forgot. Getting some of that color. I didn't like how dark that was before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little bit on the tip of my brush, paint it into this little side part here, get my brush, clean it off in the water without scraping any water off. I'm trying to pick up water with my brush, okay? I'm going to go over to this little side bit to make that a lighter color over the side. In watercolors, when we're making colors lighter, we can use the white paint, but usually all we do is make the color more watery, so it's a bit more see-through. I'm going to paint that watered down bit around the eyes there. Okay, I'm going to paint that bit around there. So my first layer is done. Now, if you don't have a hairdryer or a heat tool handy, you will need to wait for this layer to dry before you try and paint the rest. Now, let's just do an experiment. I got a little bit impatient. I didn't want to wait for this to dry, so I started painting over here. Oh no, my brown paint is going into the bit I don't want to be brown. I don't want that to be brown. I want that to be really light. So I can use my paper towel like an eraser. I can clean off my brush and make this area really, really, really wet. I want there to be a really big puddle there. And I use my paper towel and I clean that up. And it's gone. Okay, so you can fix your mistakes mostly with watercolor, which is really lovely. But we do try and, we do try and get it right, don't we? But sometimes mistakes happen. Okay, so we've just repainted that on there, and I'm just going to use my heat gun to dry this off. No, I'm not. I forgot that was not plugged in. Here we go. I'm going to use my heat gun this time for real. Okay, so that little bit there's still ever so slightly wet, but it doesn't really matter because I'll paint there last. I'll make sure I do the rest of the bits that I need to do next first, and then I'll go back to that bit afterwards. So the next color that I'm going to use is this color up here, I think. See, I'm not sure because sometimes I forget what I do. So I'm going to use that little piece of paper I was doing my warm-up on before, just to check what that color looks like, to make sure that is what I want. And that is what I want. That's the perfect one. So that's this color up here. Again, only if you're painting it the same way I am. You don't have to. I get my brush. I'm going to actually get that and I'm going to water it down a little bit because it's a little bit too dark just straight out of the pan. So watering that down on the side there. And then I'm going to paint that on just in a thin layer over everywhere else on the bunny. Everywhere else on the bunny. Now I want that to be a bit lighter at the top, so the other way I can do that is if I clean my brush off and just get some clear water and mop that clear water down to the bottom, it'll make it darker down the bottom. But if I scrape it and push it down to the bottom with my paintbrush, it'll be darker down the bottom and lighter at the top there. Get some more of that paint over here, all the way down. Paint. Just painting a whole layer of that color. It actually doesn't, this is a separate area, but it doesn't matter if I paint that next to it because it's the same color. Paint. Okay, I'm gonna go here, go right next to that, a little bit of overlap there, that's okay. Paint. I'm doing some tapping bits because I kind of want this layer to look a little bit furry but not too much. And when I go to the side, I'm going to paint and pull my brush off as I go off to the side here to make him look a little bit fluffy around those edges. Paint. I'm not painting inside the nose with this colour. I'm just going to leave the nose clear at this stage, or just white rather. painting around there. I want this bit to be a bit lighter there, so I'm going to clean my paintbrush off in that water, and I'm going to put that water just there, and I'm going to push it back away from that bit, push it back into somewhere I don't mind it being a bit darker, or I can get my paper towel and go dab dab if I don't want it to be too dark in that space. More of that colour, paint it all down here as well. Paint, paint, paint. I'm kind of just doing it like I'm scribbling, kind of doing a scribbling motion with my paintbrush. Grabbing some more because I didn't make enough. Getting that water, scraping it off, making that lighter. Oh, that's a bit dark. Oh well, that'll be okay. Moving that around, moving some of that dark colour that I got over there over to this side. There we go. Whoops, I didn't want colour back in the mouth part, or the cheeks rather. Okay, get my paper towel. I got lots of water. I tapped it on there. Get my paper towel and dry that off. Just to remind you that we can use the paper towel like an eraser. There we go. And that's that layer done. Beautiful. Now he's looking a bit creepy at the moment because he hasn't got his eyes on him, but he will not look creepy forever, I promise. So I'm going to use my heat tool again to dry that off. Okay, we're up to the next bit. How exciting. Now, this is going to be a little bit darker. Now, you can use this brown here if you like, but I actually kind of like to mix a bit of this brown in to this inkwell here. I'm just collecting it, scraping it off over here, getting some water to make it a bit watery. And I actually like to mix that with this color here. I'm going to collect that, twist, 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 and pop that in there as well. I'm going to check what that colour looks like over here, and I think that's pretty good actually. Okay, so I just like to put a little bit of that golden colour in just to make it a little bit less dark, a little bit more golden. Okay, so I get that colour and I paint a little bit over here. Now remember, if I want to get a thin line, I need to apply a really little bit of pressure. So I don't press very hard, press really light on the paper. Now when I go down here, I'm actually going to do that technique where I do the dots or the little lines where I don't touch them everywhere. Okay, so I'll just move that a bit closer for you so you can see. Now when I'm painting that on there, I'm actually just painting little lines, and if they're too far apart, I'm just going back in and putting little lines in between them to connect them back up. Okay, because I want there to be gaps so that you can see that layer that I've done underneath in there, and that's how we'll make him look a bit fluffy. Okay, I don't want too many of those. I don't want him to be too spotty. Okay, right, so I'm going to go back down so that I can paint the rest of this layer on. I'm going to do a really dark line at the bottom there, because when we talk about light hitting something, the light's hitting from the top, we want it to be darker underneath because there will be a bit of a shadow. Bit of line there, and this is going to go around. Now, I don't really want that stripe to be like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my paintbrush and dip it into the water and clean off that colour, and just use clear water, paint it a line right next to it. And what will happen is that will bleed out and make that line blend out, which is what we want to happen there. Okay, so I'm going to do that. Next I'm gonna add some more of that colour, and I'm gonna paint it down here, paint it down here. And I'm gonna be careful not to let that touch too much because I don't want that water to bleed out and make this bit too light. Okay, paint that down there. I'm also gonna go like this. Where the fringe bit is, I'm gonna make that a little bit darker by getting more paint on my brush, less water, less wateriness. More paint, paint a little bit of the fringe going over the eyes there. Go down, paint around here. Moving that paint, I'm not collecting any more colour at this stage. I just want this next bit to be a bit lighter. Okay, I don't want to paint over that line where the nose is. I'm going to leave that bit a bit lighter so that we can see where the nostrils are. Paint that down there. I'm going to grab a little bit more colour, move that back up there a bit, paint that around down here. A little longer, I'm going to go a little bit down here. Okay, paint, 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 paint. Paint, 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 paint. Get a little bit of that up there. I don't want that there, so just pick it up with my paper towel. Paint, 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 paint. Okay. You might be thinking at this stage when you're painting your bunny, oh, this doesn't look very good. But I promise you, once you add in the eyeballs, okay, and some of the outline that we'll do over the top, it'll come together really quite nicely. I'm gonna make it quite dark underneath these little cheeks on both sides because I want, it's kind of like there's a bit of a shadow there. Okay, I'm gonna paint, 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 paint longer lines on the side so that he's a bit fluffy looking. Paint, 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 paint. When I'm painting those fluffy side bits, I'm pressing hard and then I'm lifting up. Pressing hard and lifting up. I'll show you that on my little scrap piece of paper here I've got. So pressing hard and lifting up. Pressing hard and lifting up. Lifting up. Lifting up. And then I get these little pointy tips. That's how I do that. So paint, 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 paint. Okay. Paint, paint, paint. Very good. Now you'll notice I've left that tummy bit a bit light because I'm not sure if all bunnies have light bellies, but that's how I want mine to look. I'm just putting some water over there because I want that to be a bit smooth. I don't really want there to be a harsh line. I'm just mopping it back up, scraping it back with the colours at the top and not the bottom of that wet bit. Now I'm looking back at my top of my ear and I'm noticing there's a little faint line there. So I'm just going to get my brush while it's a bit dry because I've just dried it off on my paper towel. And I'm going to just go and mop up a little bit of that water, pushing it down and drying it off on my paper towel. Okay, drying it off. There we go. Now, I'm just going to erase a bit on there. Okay, now it's the time where I look and go, are there any bits I would like to be quite dark? I want this bit here to be quite dark under his chin. So I've just picked up some of that colour straight from the pan. And I am just putting that in and around underneath those cheeks. And I also think I want it to be a bit darker up here. A bit darker up here. And possibly a little bit darker just on this little tuft of hair and fringe. And maybe just a little bit here. Okay. So, I think I might be done with that layer. I'm going to clean off my brush and use the heat tool again. So remember, anytime I use the heat tool, you either need to wait for the layer to dry or you need to use a hairdryer or something to dry off that layer. Okay, there we go. That layer is all dry. Now, to add the final details, all of the black bits, you can do it in two ways. You can either paint them on with a paintbrush, or you can use a texter. I'm going to show you both ways so that you have an idea of both ways. But yeah, you can do either. Now, I'm just looking at my picture, my reference picture, and I'm realizing I've actually forgotten to paint inside the nose. I'm going to do that now. I'm just going to paint that on. Just painted that with this pink here. Painting that into that area there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that to dry naturally while I paint the eye, one of the eyes. My black's not very wet anymore, so I'm just just wetting that. The black's really very dark. So I'm getting that now. This is a little bit tricky. So if you are quite young or feel like you don't have quite enough of a steady hand yet, you might like to ask a grown-up for help, or you might like to use a texter. Texters are sometimes a little bit easier than the paintbrushes. So get my paint, scrape it off so that it goes to a bit more of a point, and then I'm going to get it and only go really lightly on my paper so that I get that thin area painted in. I don't want to paint inside that white bit because I want that to be like a shiny bit on the eye. Tap, tap, tap. I can tap in some more paint once I'm happy with where I filled that in. Now the other way is to use a marker. I have one of these little felt tips here, and I can outline my little thing and just colour that in. Now that's going to take me ages because that's actually really very thin. So I'm going to get a thicker one that I have just here. I like to use my Montmartre graphic fine liners. Quite like the bold one for this particular task. You could use a Sharpie as well though. A Sharpie would work quite well. So I've just coloured that in. You can see the difference in the way that looks with the coloured in eye versus the painted eye. And what I like to do with my bunny, I can do it with my paintbrush. I can paint lines around the outline areas, but it is much easier if you use a felt tip pen or a texter. So just like to outline those areas when they're dry. Don't do it like it when it's wet like I just did. Okay, just outline, try and remember where those lines are. And this is why I didn't add in my whiskers, because I thought I could just decide where I wanted to put them after I painted this. You don't have to do an outline if you don't want, you can just leave it. But I really like the way the outline looks on this bunny. I have to wait for that to dry before I can add eyelashes to it. Okay, up there, around here, up that way, down there. It doesn't matter if I miss it a little bit. Okay, there, and back around that nostril now that it's a bit more dry. And I've got to add eyelashes to this once the paint is dry, but, oh no, there we go. What am I missing? I am missing whiskers. I'm going to draw those on. Just thin lines go on either side. And there you have it. You have your very own Artalishious Bunny. I hope you love him as much as I love him. I think he's great. I'd love to see those on the Artalishious community, Artalishious Creations community on Facebook. That would be wonderful. I'd love to hear how you went with that. Yeah, I hope you had a fun time doing that.